the way I covered it, I don't I try to go into my coverage without an agenda.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Took Trash, and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Zack Heydorn from SE Scoops. So, welcome to the show.
Dude, it is so good to be here, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I'm very excited to chat with you. But before we get into your journey in the wrestling media, Zack, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
Man, as an overall fanboy, it goes way back. So like indirectly, my parents talk about this all the time, but indirectly, I had a babysitter when I was like 2 years old that was a constant wrestling fan. Like, and I would be at her house like for daycare or whatever, and she'd have it on. And I certainly didn't know what I was watching back then, but they joke about that because it was on just years into me being on this earth. So that's like
Hmm.
part one. But really what it was, I had a grandfather that was very much into professional wrestling, and he had been since, the 1950s, where
Hmm.
with like watched Vern Gagne and Killer Kowalski and, that really old school era. And he just stuck with it. And so when, I had started watching it with him a little bit, and then it just stuck with me for forever since then.
That's very cool. Going back to your babysitter, Zack, I'm very curious to know this because I find it quite funny. Was there ever a moment that your parents recall that say it was on at her house and they walked in and they was like, "What the hell is our son watching?" Like, was there ever
you
an
know,
inappropriate moment or anything like that?
no, not that they said. Like, I mean, I think their reaction was more surprised because they didn't at the time, and really still don't know much about it, or haven't, like, were never fans of their own. So they just kind of were like, huh, okay, I guess that's what she likes to watch, and so there you have it. So no, nothing scandalous or anything like that, but just, it was on in 1987, when I
Mm.
was, around her. And so it's just an interesting little anecdote. Again, I was two, didn't know what was going on, of course, but it was the seeds were planted early. The seeds were planted
I
early.
get it's sort of like it's to bring my psychology degree out a little bit. It's sort of like an emotional core memory, I think, that
Yeah.
sort of gets implanted and you just pick it up from there. But anyway, you talk about your grandfather there. What era did he start showing you? And he was like, yeah, this is my thing now.
So with him, it was like early 90s. So I'd say, like, after like Hulkamania, but before the Attitude Era. So kind of like that doldrums period of WWE. I was more of
Mm,
a WWE fan, like, growing up. So like Bret Hart, Shawn, um, Diesel, that era, was kind of when I, like, first got into it. And then of course Attitude Era hit and whole ball game changed. And then obviously, as I became a bigger fan, I went backwards and watched all the Hogan stuff and all that from the past. But it was really like 90, 93,
mm.
94, right around there. But WWE or WWF at the time, it was not. I wasn't too big of a WCW fan at that time.
Mm. Three unrelated questions there that I think are quite
Shoot.
cute. I think are quite cool. It's like you talked about there not being a WCW fan. Did that change when Hulk Hogan went over to WCW and the NWO started? Out of interest, we'll go there first.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. But it wasn't necessarily because of Hulk Hogan, just because, again, like, I kind of came into it after his, like, initial hot Hulkamania run, but it was more just like the cool factor of WCW at that time, NWO, like, it's just kind of the more real adult presentation of it that I think kind of, which I think attracted a lot of fans at the time.
Mm.
that was really the driving factor for me to check out WCW at that time. So yes, but not because I was this huge Hulk Hogan fan. It was just he's a big star and they're doing some cool things over there. So I'm gonna expand what I watch and check that out too. But it wasn't like, I want to relive the Hulkamania days or anything like that.
Mm. You talked about because you didn't grow up a fan, not reliving the Hulkamania days. You said you went back and watched them. So is there anything from that point that you went back and watched and you was like, I don't get this. I don't understand why people enjoyed this. And then to flip that, was there anything that you were like, oh man, I wish I was a fan during this point?
You know, I think going back and watching it, I think it's always, and look, I say all this to say about Hulk Hogan, like, of where he is today, and it's like, okay, you kind of look back a little bit differently on some of that stuff. But at the time, I think the biggest takeaway, that I had was, boy, I became this fan when the business was like down here, and you go back and you watch, 1986 Hulk Hogan or 1987 Hulk Hogan, and it's like this crowd reactions that you couldn't believe if you just started watching in 1993 or 1994. And so I think the intensity of just the audiences at that time and how they resonated with Hulk Hogan was like, pretty eye-opening and just fun to watch, regardless of whether you are a fan of Hulk Hogan or not. I mean, like, if you like pro wrestling, I think you're attracted to crowd responses like he got. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea. And so to see that was pretty interesting. And then, to flip around and then live it again in the Attitude Era with the NWO and Austin and Rock and like that stuff, it's a pretty cool time to get like indoctrinated into the wrestling industry.
You brought up there both the crowd reactions for WCW and the WF at that time. So when you do sort of start watching WCW, does your WF output of what you watch take a hit, or are you just one of those guys that's flipping through channels every Monday, and if something catches your eye, you're like, I'm staying with this for the night?
I was both. Like I was not, like, again, I started with WWF stuff, but I wasn't like, I'm just a WWF fan. I watched what entertained me, what I thought was, interesting, and didn't really, shy away from any product just because, like, it was like, that looks interesting to me and that looks cool, or I like that character, or I like that wrestler. I'll be there. And like, and it's interesting because, like, there's a time where I started WWF fan, and WCW gets a lot of momentum, and so I spent more time with that product, and being a fan of that. And then when WCW started to go down the tubes, and Austin got hot and Rock got hot, then I migrated on back and spent a lot more time with the WWE product. So I'd say it's like at the time I was like a fair, like, I was a fan that, like, Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff were like looking to secure, like, because I would just kind of go, where the the product felt best. And so I didn't really discriminate.
Do you remember a night from the Monday Night Wars that maybe you picked to watch WCW, and then something happened on the WWF side and you were like, change channel now?
Dude, I was one of those, hundreds of thousands of people who changed the channel for Mick Foley.
I figured this was coming.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I don't really, and the thing is, the interesting thing about it is, like, I didn't, obviously I watched WCW after that, but really, like, WWE likes to tell the story, right? They like to spin the narrative of it. It was that night that changed everything. And in a lot of ways it was, but for me, it legitimately was that way. Like, you saw just how much momentum the WWE had at that time, and just how hot Austin versus McMahon was at that time. And like, you know, I I know I didn't want to miss anything from that, moving forward. And so, from that point on, I was like, all right, instead of starting with WCW and moving over, I'll start with Vince, and see what he's doing with Austin, and go from there. But yeah, like it's funny to like hear them like spin the narrative, on their DVDs and Peacock
Yeah.
shows or whatever the heck else it is. But and I kind of am like, oh wait. To myself, I say, hey, oh gosh, here's WWE spinning a tale. But then I think about it, I'm like, no, like that was me. I was that person. So
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of needle them on that.
You brought up there when WCW closed and things like that. Have you, I know we're skipping a little bit, but have you ever had a period where you were like, okay, wrestling isn't my priority anymore because maybe life got in the way? Or have you had a gap, is what I'm saying? Have you got a gap in your knowledge?
Man, I've had no gap. I've had no gap since I started watching. And I mean, obviously, I have had other priorities. I've got a wife, I've got two kids, I've went to school, and and had other interests and played sports, and did a lot of stuff. But wrestling has always, it's been there, like through, like right with me on all of it, and not
Mm,
like replaced by anything. It's just been a very important part of my life, and what I like to do, and what I feel like I'm good at now too. And so it's very much like a ride along on all those other big moments, and not something that has been kind of kicked to the side in favor of something else.
that's very, very cool to hear. But you talked about there being a fan probably since, if I said 93, 94 to present day, would that be correct?
That'd be correct. Yep.
Uh, is there ever an era that you go back and watch that maybe you were like, okay, I've gone back and watched this since it aired, and I'm like, why was I a fan during this point?
I mean, I say Attitude Era, because, and for a couple different reasons. I go back to watch it because, so when I was writing the book, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I had to go back and watch a lot of Attitude Era shows
Yeah,
because I was watching the Steve Austin stuff, and I wanted to soak that all in, not just like by me like picking out
rose
stuff that I
tinted
knew,
glasses,
but
shall we say?
yes, and so I ended up like watching a lot of the Austin stuff, which like to this day holds up very well. The other stuff around it, though, in the Attitude Era, is very like, it's very hit or miss. Like, it's easy to look back on that era and think about how awesome it was because you had Rock, because you had Austin, because you had Vince, and Undertaker, and like those guys, and that stuff for the most part was really good. But man, like some of the stuff around it, like what was I watching the other day? I was watching like a Val Venus thing the other day, like
Oh
this promo,
no.
and it's like, and at the time, you're kind of like into it because it's, you're watching something that like, it's a little edgy, it's a little raw, for no pun intended. But
Mm,
boy, that does not hold up today. Like, it just does
mm.
not hold up at all. Like, as far as it being good professional wrestling, some of the finishes that they did for matches like during Raw in the Attitude Era were also like not great. The matches themselves, I mean, they don't hold a candle to the day-to-day wrestling matches that we see today. Like, they're
Mm.
so different in that regard. So that was like a fun project to go back and like watch the Austin stuff and kind of confirm like, okay, yeah, that was all very good, but boy, you take that out of that era, you take, and it's just obvious to say, but you take it out, and it's like that product probably can't sustain itself the way that it was.
Mm. You brought up there right in the book. Is it for Austin or about Austin? Like, I should clarify that really. How did that come
Yeah,
about? Things like that.
man, that's quite the story, man. Like, so I had been big into with the torch. One of the first projects that I had with my work at pwtorch.com was writing a column about, the art of wrestling. So not so much like talking about booking or talking about, who should be the champion or any of that stuff, but just like picking out a segment and like talking about the art of it, the facial expressions, how the match was structured, psychology, things like that. And I
Mm.
got really into that as I continued doing it. And I thought it would always be cool to maybe write a book about that topic, because I think there's a lot of wrestling fans and people who aren't fans who kind of maybe don't see pro wrestling like through that lens. And so I thought it'd be cool to like write something that um, educates on that side of
Mm.
the business. And so it just so happened that, at that time I connected with Hybrid Shoot Publishing and Jonathan Snowden, who wrote the Ken Shamrock book from a couple years ago, right before the pandemic that came out, or maybe it was during the pandemic. He wrote that, and I was able to connect with him and just pitched ideas, and we kicked ideas back and forth about how to present that topic. And we just decided, rather than present that topic like from a broad perspective of, here, let's write a book about the art of wrestling, it was, let's write a book about the art of one person's career,
Mm.
like one act, one character. And I landed on Austin and just told his whole story, from start to finish. So from the days in the USWA to his last match with Kevin Owens, like I cover all of it.
You've got that far.
And just
Wow.
deep dive into the art of wrestling. So, so that's going to come out here in a little bit, in about a month or so, probably.
Have
And
you got a release date for it yet? Because it might be out by the time this goes live. I am not going to lie. I do sit on my content for a while.
no, no release date yet. No release date yet. The pre-orders went live earlier this spring, so we already did the pre-order thing. Had a lot of support for it there, which was great to see, and I'm so appreciative of that. And
Mm.
once the on sale date is available, I'll make sure to let everybody know.
That's very cool. So I am curious to know, did you have any interaction with writing a book about Austin? Did you have any interaction with him? Anything like that? Did you have to get his permission or things like that?
No interaction. It's his independent project from from him specifically. Hopefully, if I do it right and promote it right, maybe I can get his hands on a copy. That'd be pretty cool. But until then, no.
Ah, fair enough. That's very cool. So you brought up there PW Torch. How do you get involved? Because you said in your own words, something you're actually quite good at now, in your own words, is podcasting and things like that. How do you get involved with
Yeah.
wrestling podcasts, PW Torch, etc.?
So that is a fun story to talk about, man. I'm really glad you asked, because I don't get to like relive that journey like too much, and it's fun to think about. I have a broadcasting background. I went to school for mass communication, and I was a radio DJ, and so
Mm.
I always felt like, just from training on that and doing radio shows and things like that. I've always had that bug to do that kind of thing, and um then after school, just trying to figure out like, okay, how do I use what I learned there for something that I really, really like? All right, let's try to do something that has to do with pro wrestling. So I jumped around and like did some work for like some freelance work for some smaller organizations, like smaller websites, smaller podcasts, and just try to build up like a Rolodex of work that I could then take out to some of the bigger places. And once I felt like I had that, I had reached out to Wade and ended up writing for his MMA Torch website to
Ah.
start. And then when something opened up on the wrestling side, I just jumped on it. And the first thing I ever covered for Wade was the first ever Mae Young Classic. So I covered that start to finish. And from there it just kind of snowballed. Like, and I picked up
Mm.
any kind of job or beat that I could get my hands on, whether it was, I did 205 Live for a long time. I covered Monday Night Raw for a good 2.5 years stretch. Podcasting all the way through and guesting on some of his shows, and just gaining some momentum and experience, really.
Mm.
And then and then yeah, it just eventually, that's how I got my foot in the door, just like taking all sorts of different jobs and different, cover this, cover that. Can you do this? Can you do that? And I just tried to say yes to as much of it as I could. And it ended up kind of landing me in a really good spot.
You brought up there the fact that you're a radio guy and the fact that you do have a qualification in communications and stuff, and the fact that you have just sort of, I don't want to say taken any job that's been offered to you, but I know what I mean. Like taking as much experience as you can is the way I'll phrase it. Is that your advice for people that are maybe doing something like this, trying to create their brand as a podcaster? What would your advice be for people like that? Would it be to get a degree, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I always think that's a good idea. No matter what, it's just a good foundation, for for work in general. If you can swing it, but even if you can't, I think getting a foot in the door is important in this industry, and I think you don't always get your foot in the door with a sweet paid gig, or you don't always get your foot in the door doing exactly the job that you want to do. There is an element of like working your way up, and I don't know, paying your dues sounds bad, but
I know
it's
what you
it's
mean, though.
yeah, it's not really like, I wouldn't say it's paying your dues. It's more just like working your way up. Like you're not necessarily gonna get, your dream writing gig right out of the gate. Like you may have to take a couple other ones. Like I said, I learned and got super interested in MMA because Wade needed somebody to cover that, and I was like, okay, like I'll do it just to get a foot in the door. So I think not only does that expand your horizon in terms of the experience that you have, what you can cover, how you can cover it, it also just it shows the person that you're working for that you're serious and that they can trust you and lean on you for different jobs. And so I'm certainly not sitting here saying, hey, take any job no matter what. It's not that. It's just figure out where you want to go and understand that it may not be a straight line to that end. You may have to zigzag around a little bit in order to get to where you want to go. But perseverance is huge, and I know that there's been times where I've been like, oh man, I've really, whatever, Raw has been terrible. So like the last month, and there's no way I could sit through another 3 hours of it. But, liking the industry and loving, covering it and working with people that I work with and worked with, it kind of helped buoy me up. So it's all about kind of staying the course.
That's very interesting. You brought up there times when wrestling might be bad or you might be burned out or things like that. How do you stay sort of motivated to go, okay, I've got to watch, for example, I know you do the Dynamite reviews for SE Scoops now. I've got to
Yeah.
watch Dynamite, but I'm really burned out. How do you stay motivated to watch wrestling? And then what is your prep like for podcasts to sort of be in the zone, to be entertaining's the wrong word, but I know what I mean. Like
Yeah,
upbeat, and do you know what I mean?
absolutely, man. To stay motivated, I think it's just like the way I cover it. I don't I try to go into my coverage without an agenda, and
Mm,
so I don't feel like I have to like you know turn it on in a certain way. Like I don't have to watch Dynamite and sit there and try to find 10 things that are great about Dynamite. That I think would get me very unmotivated, but I can
mm,
just call it like I see it. And if I am able to do that, then I think it's easy to, write in that scenario, because you're not trying to make anything out of nothing. You're just calling it straight down the middle. Was Dynamite was good? Great. Here's why. Let's write about that. It wasn't so great. Great. Here's why. Let's write about that. A little bit of this, a little bit of that mix. Let's write about that. And so I think, being able to kind of going into my work with that type of mindset and that type of agenda to cover the business fairly, it makes
mm.
it easier to write because I'm not fishing for anything. And I think that is always what motivated me, least is like, hey, you've got to write this story, even if that story is not there. That can be really like very frustrating, and that can burn you out like even quicker. Here, if it's a bad show, I can write and have fun with the fact that it was not a
I'm
good
trying to
show.
remember
I
your
did this.
Twitter headline for this week as we
Yeah,
record
like
this.
yeah, it was not a good showing. And so I just said that and I wrote that story. And so I think that helps like keep me focused and keep things fresh and real and authentic. And I think that's the way it should be covered. And I think that that's the way, my readers want to read my work. And so that helps keep things focused. As far as oh gosh, what was your other question?
Your prep for like podcasts to sort of
Oh,
in the zone to record.
yeah. Yes. So my prep, is a significant part of like any type time I'm hosting a show and cracking the mic. Like I like to go into my shows with, topics that I want to make sure that we cover. I have A and I've got B topics typically, and the A topics are the ones that I make sure that I get to. The B topics are like, okay, these are here if we need to bring them up, because at the same time I also want to leave time for controlled tangents. Like I don't want to sound like we're robots on the air, just
Mm,
making sure that we hit every single bullet point. We want to have a conversation, we want to talk wrestling, and that doesn't necessarily mean we have to stay topic by topic by topic. So I like to build in time to go off in different directions. I also like to build in time for audience members to participate and ask questions and make comments, and I like to adjust for those. But I always go in with kind of a roadmap of where I want to go, and then I pivot from that. While the show is going live, and that goes back to like my radio days, like making sure to do show prep, and it's part of like I know there's a lot of people who can just go out there and crack the mic and go, and I like to prepare a little bit more than that. The other thing that I do is I watch a lot of wrestling. I've
mm.
got I am pretty up to speed and have seen most of the major wrestling shows of the week. The WWE product, of course, AEW, of course, but even some Ring of Honor here and there, some New Japan, Impact. Like I like to cover it all so that if I get in a situation where, hey, we need to talk Impact Wrestling, like I can do that confidently. And so watching the stuff is also just a way to always stay prepared, because you're up to speed on all the happenings.
I understand what you're saying completely there. But what about you as like a podcaster? How do you sort of get in that zone to record? Do you have to do like breathing exercises or anything like that to sort of make sure that like I'm in the zone now to record sort of thing? And then what about after? Do you have to do anything to sort of come down and go into what I like to call civilian life after a podcast
that
recording?
is that's a great question, man. So I don't do much like before a show as far as like to get like pumped up. I mean, you've seen my shows, and
Mm,
hopefully other people listening have seen them, but it's more so like I'm pretty, I try to just like be myself on the shows, like maybe with the volume turned up a little bit to like, you know, bring some people in and, be able to control the show and control the momentum. But other than that, like I'm certainly not, playing a part. Like it's not that. So I feel like going into the shows is pretty much like if I'm prepped and, I can, if we're doing a show in the morning, I can grab a cup of coffee and make sure that I'm ready to go, like and awake, I should be good. If it's later at night, same thing. I like
mm.
to, you know, um, we crack a beverage, while we record a show. Like I like to keep things just like, me in a room with a friend or two talking wrestling. And if I can maintain that tone without it feeling like a free for all, then that's kind of what I shoot for. Coming down is different though, because there really
Okay.
is like a high, not a high, but like I get,
I know exactly what
I
you're talking about because I get this for interview.
yeah, I'm sure you do. Like it's one of those things where like, I can't like stop recording the podcast and then just go to bed right away. Like I have to have something to like, bring it down a little bit. So I'll throw on maybe like some kind of show or some kind of a movie or something like that to kind of like ease back down, because yeah, there is an element of you've turned on your personality a little bit, and so I can't shut that off right away. And so I like yeah, so I kind of just like ease out of it with like some kind of show or movie, or I read, so maybe I'll do something like that. But so yeah, that's a little bit more of a process. But starting off, that I find for me to be pretty
Mm,
low maintenance.
I understand. You talked about there as well some of the amount of wrestling you might have to watch for SE scoops and stuff like that. How do
Yeah.
you make sure that, like, because you mentioned you got a wife and kids. How do you maintain sort of a, I hate this phrase, but a work-life balance? How have you got consent, not consent, like continuance with the powers that be? Like, I'm not doing a recording after this time because that's family time, things like that.
Yes, yes. I mean, I certainly schedule, most of my podcast stuff, and like anything that I do for the website, or like any kind of, you know, if I'm lucky enough to ever do these types of shows, I try to schedule them when it's my own time. So it's like, you know, not when like the kids are downstairs wanting to play, but like when they're at school or when they're at a friend's house, or, whatever. Like I try to keep that on my own time. And the pandemic, in a weird way, freed up more time for that stuff, because my other job, like I work from home, and so I have
Mm.
the freedom to do some other things that I ordinarily probably wouldn't have had, in an office. So that's how I kind of manage that. And then as far as like the shows go, a lot of them are a lot of wrestling shows, of course, are at night. So my kids are sleeping, and um, and my wife is just the best. I mean, she's just super understanding with what she knows that I am trying to do, and is really supportive of that. So that is a huge part of being able to do this job. And also, like, I don't stress about it either. Like, there's some shows that I watch live all the time because of my schedule. Like Raw is always something I'll watch live. Usually Dynamite, I start halfway through. But SmackDown, I'm always watching that pretty much on delay. Same
Mm.
thing with AW Collision now. That's normally on delay. And so I don't, I try to watch as much live as I can, but if it doesn't happen, there's just so much wrestling these days where it's like
Oh yeah.
it's impossible to watch. For me, it'd be impossible to watch it all live. So I try to just take it as it comes, and as long as I'm, as current as I can be, then that's good. And then as far as major events, pay-per-views, obviously I'm watching those all live. And but that's I got a really good support system and a really great family, and we all like to help each other achieve what we want to achieve, and that goes for my kids, and that goes for my wife, and for me too. And so we just band together and make it work.
You brought up, that is very cool to hear, my friend. You brought up there your goals within wrestling media and the fact that you want to achieve your goals. What are some of your goals? And then this is quite a big question before we do my generic question segment. If it had ended with PW Torch and you decided to not go into wrestling media still, what would you have wanted your legacy to be? What would you want your legacy to be now? And if this was to all end tomorrow, would you be happy with the body of work you've created?
Oh man, what a God! You are just full of them today. You're full of, like, the good questions. So I, I I like this industry so much,
Mm,
and when I say that, I mean professional wrestling, of course, but also the wrestling media. Like, I know there are, just like any industry, there are good eggs and there's bad eggs, and I think I'm lucky enough to be around and work with, like, you know all the good eggs, and so it makes for a really fun gig. And for that reason, like, I don't ever see myself kind of being out of it, just because I enjoy it. I enjoy it so much. And as far as like my goals, first and foremost, I want to be, you know, I want to cover I want to keep the integrity that I started covering the business with throughout like my career, in the business. Like I want people to be able to look back and go, Zack was fair with how he talked about things, and he wasn't necessarily right all the time. I'm not saying that, but fair is what I'm looking for. Fair, and that doesn't even mean balanced. It just
Mhm.
means fair and logical, and I want to be able to back up my opinions with concrete examples that I can defend. And if I can do that, and if I can look back and really, you know, look back on the body of work and confidently be able to say that I did that, like I'll be happy with how that body of work looks. And right now my goal is to build the SE Scoops brand. We just started a podcast there on Tuesday. Myself and Tyler Sage, the first ever SE Scoops Pro Wrestling podcast. So we're going to work to expand that. We're going to continue, building a great website, which they already have. And if I can contribute even a little bit to that, like that will be wonderful. And uh, maybe another book someday too could be potentially in the cards.
That'd be
We'll have to
cool.
see about that. But that'd be another kind of goal of mine. So I don't know. I don't know. I feel like when I say them out loud, they're pretty broad. But I mean, it takes a lot of work to like, really make a mark on a website like SE Scoops. And so I've got my work cut out for me to raise that ship up and keep the strong momentum that it's had for all these years, and grow our audience. And if I can reach one person, or bring someone into the fold, or make someone like wrestling, or look at wrestling a little bit differently every day, that's a win for me.
That's very cool. Just quickly, because I know you didn't want to talk about it too much, but I feel like there's an elephant in the room if we don't talk about it too much. How did your time with PW Torch come to an end? And how did your time with SE Scoops begin?
Yeah, so gosh, like I had the best time working for PW Torch and working for Wade. He was such um a great mentor for me, and taught me a lot. Not
Mm.
just about how to, you know, how to like analyze the wrestling product. I mean, he certainly taught me a lot there too, but he made me a better writer. He made me, more efficient in terms of how to write a news story, or how to write a feature editorial, or how to, even how to podcast. Like I feel like, having the time that I did with him just helped my skills grow. And so I'm just so incredibly grateful for that. And when it was time to kind of wrap up, like the he wanted to do a couple different things, and he wanted to take things, in a direction, and I wanted to kind of keep getting more and more and more and more responsibility. And those two goals at this time just didn't align. And
Mm.
so we both just amicably just went different directions. And and I'm sure, I mean, and I certainly hope our paths will cross again. But I wouldn't that's that's the story. And I wouldn't have changed my time there for anything. And hopefully we can do some work again together in the future, because I certainly love what I did there, and I love the team there. As far as SE Scoops goes, my buddy of mine from the Top Rope Nation podcast, Ryan Drosty, was a member of the SE Scoops team, and was able to open that door for me to that organization. And I'm super grateful that he did, because it's been a really great fit so far. And I owe Ryan a lot for that. And and being able to work with Mike, and started to have conversations with him as soon as Ryan made the introduction, and it kind of went pretty fast after that. So it's not an exciting story. It's
You
just
told me
kind
that
of
off
like,
camera, but
just it happened. Yeah.
I was like, we got to talk about it because I'll get comments of this is covering my own behind of like, you didn't
Right.
ask him about this. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna ask. Do you know what I mean?
dude, totally. And the thing is, like, I don't. Yeah, I mean, so to your listeners, I'm sorry. I don't have a juicy story to tell, but it really was it was a nice way
It'd be
to
like if,
go a different direction.
like, for example, I work at the cinema. It'd be like if I worked at the cinema and then I decided, oh, I'm gonna go work in a supermarket now. It just sounds very amicable and very like
Very.
no hard feelings sort of thing, which is very
Not
good.
at all.
Which is
It is
very
good.
good.
It is good. It is good.
Which is
Like I said, I owe Wade a lot. Like he really helped me grow and be a better journalist and a better analyst of this business. So, I I would never trade that in for anything.
that's very cool. So as we wrap this up, Zach, we are going to do a quick segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite wrestler's entrance theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler of all time. Basically questions that Zach might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So what is your favorite match of all time, Zach?
Of all time,
Yeah.
WrestleMania 17, Rock Austin. That to me, that is like the pinnacle of what you want in pro wrestling. Two big stars, big time stakes, big time stage, all colliding head on. I love that match. I know heel turn, yes, not
You
great,
debunk
obviously.
that. You don't count that from what we've
I
discussed
mean, you
previously.
have. I don't discount it. It's just that it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the actual match
I
itself.
get you. I
And
get you.
so so yeah, so that's my favorite match of all time. Yeah.
One thing I'll add, and this is, this from conversations we've had previously, I love Heyman's commentary on that match. Love it. That's one of the reasons I love that match.
That's like in 20 years, that's going to be a trivia question about professional wrestling. Like who is the commentator opposite Jim Ross for Rock Austin at 17? It's going to be Paul Heyman, and that's a cool thing because he can work, man. That guy, he knows how to
Mm,
promote, and he's good on that match.
mm. For me, and you might disagree with me on this, Paul Heyman and Jim Ross are but simultaneously the best commentary team, but the most underrated because of how short their run was. If that makes
Oh,
any
he's so
sense.
short.
Yeah.
I can't argue with that. I mean, I think we could have a debate about it for sure, but it doesn't. I won't dismiss that outright. No.
Mm. So, what is your favorite pay per view of all time, as well as that? When I say pay per view, I mean Double or Nothing 2019, for example.
Yeah, my favorite pay per view ever is WrestleMania 15, and it's not because I think it's the best pay per view ever. It's just my own personal favorite, just for the time that it was. It's like a moment in time for me, and I'll remember it always for just the environment that I was
Mm.
in, friends over, pizza, like just it was just a really good time, and so um that takes the cake as far as like my favorite goes. But it's not. Does it have the best matches? No. Does it have some of the biggest talent? No, it doesn't. But it's a fun show and is a really good snapshot of that era of WWE.
Mm. I understand what you're saying completely there, and I like that because you can genuinely tell you're passionate about it. And
Yeah,
something
yeah, hell
something
yeah.
I've found when we do this segment is you get some people that do the answers like yourself from the heart and stuff like that, and you get some people that do. Oh, I think this is the answers the viewers want to hear. So I am very cool. It's very cool that you have said that answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Straight up. Yep.
And then what is your favorite wrestler's entrance to?
Steve Austin, glass breaking.
Mm.
I don't think there's better entrance music for anybody. I think that's so iconic and is so perfect to the character that the music serves
Mm.
that it is absolutely perfect. And I think that takes the cake for me by a wide margin.
Is that a case of you brought up the entrance music suiting the wrestler? Is that a case for you of the entrance theme because you really enjoy Austin's work? works with Austin, but if say they put it on someone like I'm throwing an attitude wrestler out there, Val Venus, for example, it wouldn't have worked because of the character. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely, exactly. Like this was a match made, man. Like Steve Austin and that music at that time with that crowd and the pops that the glass breaking would pull out of them. Like you can't line it up much better than that. You cannot put that music on probably anybody else and have it work the same way as it did for him. It is perfect in that
Mm.
regard.
I understand what you're saying completely. And who is your favorite tag team of all time, Zach?
The Usos. The Usos. I mean,
Mm.
I'm a fan of. I love tag team wrestling. I really love tag team wrestling. So and so like as I mentioned earlier, when I started watching wrestling, it was like the Heart Foundation were big, and so I love them as a team. I love the Horsemen and what Arn and those guys did as a tag team. But I think what the Usos have done like surpasses all of them. I mean, their run from a longevity standpoint is there. They've wrestled with some of the biggest matches. They're part of, $1 billion company, at the top
Mm.
of the card with Roman Reigns. And they're just good professional wrestlers and they understand tag team psychology. So, it's hard. They're just so entertaining. And, I don't think it's just recency bias. I think they're generally, you know, the best of all time.
Before they entered the top of the card with Roman, you brought that up there. Not to talk too current because we're going to be sitting on this one for a while. But would they have cracked your favorite before the tribal chief stuff?
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, yes, as a tag team, as like a straight up tag team, yeah. I mean, because they've had so many good tag team matches with everybody, the New Day, the Bar, the Shield, like I mean, they've worked with everybody, and so they were a polished and a top team, um, before the Bloodline stuff, and you know the fact that they had the run that they did with the Bloodline, just it's in a weird way, it's the best storyline that they've ever done, but it's also icing on the cake because I think they're
Validation almost.
there you go. That's a good word for it. And the paydays too, like they're
Yeah,
working at the top of the
yeah.
card. Like that matters. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's their best story, but I think they were crowned, a legendary tag team long before that started.
That's very cool. And then as we wrap this up, Zach, who is your favorite wrestler of all time?
Let's see. Boy, that is my favorite wrestler of all time.
You can Jimmy Van
Um,
this and go through errors. That is okay. I will say that.
well, I mean, I I think Steve Austin is my all time favorite. When I look at wrestlers, even now, you know, do they make you feel something?
Hmm.
And I think there's really good wrestlers out there today. There's a ton of great wrestling, and like from an in ring perspective, there are so many people who are so athletic and who can just work their butts off. Tonight on Fight TV, there's going to be 6, 7, 8 indie shows, and there's going to be really good matches on all of those shows. And so I think it's hard to to use that, at least for me, as a barometer of like who my favorite is. But I looked for do like what did these guys make you feel? And
Hmm.
with Steve Austin, the run was so hot and the everything that he did mattered so much. And when you take his career back further and you look at, all right, he had a really good run as like a heel wrestler studying Steve Austin in WCW. And he had a really great run as, part of a tag team, the Hollywood Blondes. And, he was able to transform himself from, the $1 Million Man into, the Stone Cold Act. And so I just think he's a guy, and I'm probably a little biased because I literally watched his career from the very beginning to the very
Hmm.
end for the book project. And you can see so much of it develop. You can see so much of it like there in different eras of his career. And then he puts it all together for the big Stone Cold run. And it's fascinating. But throughout the entirety of the run, whether it's Stunning Steve or the Hollywood Blondes, like there's an element of he's making you feel something there, and that stands out to me. Ric Flair is a close second, just because it's Ric Flair and the guy is so good and so polished. And yes, he's got tremendous issues outside of the ring for sure, but from an in-ring, from being just a pro wrestler, he's a close second. But but Steve Austin, number one.
That's very cool to hear. So as we wrap this up, Zach, the question I end all my interviews on is, I believe as podcasters, content creators, whatever word you want to use, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of very, very strange way if you think about the world. So what is one piece of content you want to be remembered for, and one that you're like, powers that be, please get rid of this. I don't want to be remembered for.
Well, I want to be. I hope this book that's going to come out stands the test of time. I mean, I tried to write it from that perspective, and write it from a perspective of, if you become a wrestling fan 30 years from now and you stumble along upon this guy, Steve Austin, and you want to learn more about him, you can pick this book up and get a very, very good sense of what he was like as a pro wrestler. And I'm proud of the project. I can't wait for people to read it. I'm grateful for Jonathan and Hybrid for publishing it. And but it's definitely something that I'm proud of, and definitely something that I hope people enjoy and people continue to enjoy. Which one would I want hidden away forever? I wrote an article for the Torch about, God, it had to have been in late 2021. So, or excuse me, late 2020. So pandemic, and like right after Becky Lynch left to have her baby. And I wrote an article about how Charlotte Flair was like, the key to the women's division at that point, and how she could even be more popular than Becky Lynch. And I was advocating for more Charlotte Flair, more Charlotte Flair, more Charlotte Flair. And I read that article now and I'm like, man, I think I had the idea was right. Big star, your other big star is really gone. Lean on your big star. But boy, it did not end up the way that I thought it would. She's become kind of like a more of a tired act than I'd want to admit. And it's not a piece that aged well at all. So let's scratch that from the record. We can.
That's very cool to hear, my friend. So as we wrap this up, Zach, where can the good people find the book, your other work, etc.? Follow you, all that good generic stuff.
Man, listen, before I do that, thank you so much for having me on the show. This has been such a fun conversation. It's cool to open up about this, and I appreciate you having me. Everybody out there can check out my work right now at SEScoops.com. I'm writing news and editorials there every single day of the week. We also have our SE Scoops Pro Wrestling podcast, Tuesday nights, 9 Eastern time. You can find us live on YouTube at 9 Eastern and watch along, participate in the show. And you can also download it in a podcast form on the day after, on Wednesday morning, where any podcasts are found. So Apple, Spotify, everywhere you can find podcasts, you can get this, so you can download it there. Follow me on social media. It's Zack_Heydorn, ZACK_HEYDORN. And for the book, it will be available soon from Hybrid Shoot, and I will have all of that, how to buy it, how to order it, on my social media account, on my Twitter account. Again, it's at Zack_Heydorn, and you'll be able to find everything concerning the book here very, very soon.
It's well worth doing, guys. Not only probably one of my favorite content creators in wrestling media, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Flourish on YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Flourish. And I will see you in the next video. Goodbye now.